Well, about to get on the road here, driving down south from Washington through Oregon and into California. This is a trip that's been planned for a long time, but I've been trying to find time to get it in. I'm visiting the Klamath River. In the last couple of years, several dams have been removed from the Klamath River, and the aftermath of that is quite disastrous. And so I'm going down to interview people and to talk to some of those that are directly impacted by the removal of those dams. There's a faction within our country that believes that dams are not good, power generating dams, and they feed our society the lie that somehow these dams are impacting fish runs and salmon runs, and it just isn't true. And so I've been working hard. We actually did another video locally here in Southeast Washington showing how to protect our 4 lower Snake River dams. But it's a project that's very important to me. It's one that I'm going to take a few days, and we're going to go down to California and we're going to document exactly what's happened as a result of removing those dams and the detriment that it's been to those people in those communities. One community in particular I know we're going to go to doesn't have water because the water table has dropped, and so they're having to truck water in on trailers in order for the people to have water, potable water, just for their homes. So it's a big deal, and I think it'll be instructive for us to help us prevent people from attacking our power generating dams here in Washington state, which produce 60% of our energy in the state. This is just the start of some unbelievable discussions that I had on this trip. I cannot overstate the negative impact this had on the lives of thousands of Americans in this region. Because of the hours and hours of video that we got and our desire to be as clear and accurate as possible, we've broken this video into a series of actually 4 videos, which are all linked in the description. I call this video the process video, but this one's the summary process video. There's actually a detailed process video, and we explain how they navigated to get the authorization and funding to blow up the dams. I want you and I want to fully understand this because I feel like it's in our best potential to prevent it from happening again. The next video is much more personal. It's a video mainly focused on people's stories, the devastation in which the vast and the sheer gut-wrenching dishonor to everything it is to be American. We have an eminent domain provision in our Constitution which requires just payment to people when the government determines that it's necessary to take property from individuals, but even that is strongly discouraged by every red-blooded American. What they have done here is absolutely crushing to the people of the Klamath River region and the Klamath River Basin. The final video is a video about a float that we were blessed to have taken the opportunity to take down the river, down the Klamath River, with a fishing guide who has spent his life on the river just as his dad did. This is a somber celebration of a river that was once brought to life by some big, beautiful dams, but is now dead and in need of restoration, starting with some new, bigger, and more beautiful dams. Look for the links below to these other videos. There's 4 total, and I take responsibility for the quality of the audio. We were using some new equipment on this trip, and as you will notice, the audio system, which was new, didn't produce the results that we needed. What we found out later was the equipment was great, but we were not adjusting the settings properly as we went through the many hours of interviews. That's totally my fault, and I apologize for it, but I'm also going to come in and try to make some comments in these videos as we go along just to make it more clear and to keep everybody on track.
So I kind of created this Facebook page, the Klamath Dam and Removal page, because it was a way for us locals and anybody to be able to document like all the changes that were happening on the Klamath River, especially after the dam removals. There's 4 dams.
So we have the JC
There's the JC Boyle Dam, which is
JC Boyle, and then there's the Copco 1 and 2. And then the Iron Gate.
Yeah, so the JC Boyle Dam is the dam that was located up in Oregon. And then as you come down the stream, the next dam would have been the Copco Dam 1, which was the biggest dam. And right behind that downstream was Copco Dam 2. That was taken out in like the summer of 2023. So that was the first dam that was taken out because that was the small one going down Ward's Canyon. And then Iron Gate would have been the lowest dam on the river before it was free flowing to the Klamath River. And so that was the 4th dam.
Yeah. Are you guys familiar with the structure of how they structured the entities to be able to remove the dams? Explain that
You
to
want
me.
to know how they did it?
Just, yeah.
We went from being, I think it was the 5th wealthiest rural county in California to the 5th poorest overnight, and we've been there ever since. Nobody ever knew of any salmon to any numbers that ever returned any higher than Keno, never known above Keno.
I also want to emphasize that as an engineer, I was most interested in understanding how those that are actively working against our good manage to get to the point of being able to destroy and remove these dams. But I could not accept the realities of the devastating stories as they came in one after another. In this next clip, Rex is telling about the temperature of the Klamath River, which is unique. Normally rivers start out cold near the top of the river and they heat up due to the sun load as they proceed downriver to the ocean, where it's shallower. In the case of the Klamath River, it's the opposite. The reservoir is huge at the top and very shallow, so it gets sun-baked, and it causes the temperatures to be very high at the top of the river. As it proceeds down the river, it actually reduces in temperature. When they installed the 4 dams that were removed, the massive lakes that were created behind the dams were very deep, so that radically decreased the temperature of the river beyond each of those dams, because only a small amount of the water that was being held back was spilled over. That created wildly more life in the hundreds of miles of river between the dams and the ocean.
With the artificial cold water it produced at Iron Gate was the reason the populations jumped up so much, and for 20 years after it was put in, the agencies themselves hailed it as the greatest improvement for sustainability for salmon in the entire Pacific West.
Here, Rex is giving an example of citizens' wells that went dry after the dams were removed. The KRRC, which stands for the Klamath River Removal Corporation, established a boundary for the areas where they would take responsibility for any of the negative effects of removing the dams. Rex mentions that some people outside of this area were impacted by losing their well water. I can tell you from my own experience that people right next to the reservoir had wells go dry, land settle, and property values plummet because of the beautiful landscape that they once had was now gone. So let's listen in.
They have people whose wells are going dry just outside the boundary, and KRRC, one of them, I guess, just responded and said, we aren't responsible for that. That's a result of climate change. Even though they had the wells every year for decades up until the dam was taken out.
We are told that the primary reason to remove the dams is because of a desire to save the salmon. Millions of people are misled by these lies. I've documented this in Southeast Washington at some of the Snake River dams that are equipped with beautiful fish ladders, gentle spillways for juvenile fish, and amazing locks for river barges. At least 99% of the fish are able to pass by these dams, and massive improvements have been made, costing billions of dollars, much of which is a complete waste, as Rex mentions here in this video. Many reference the Fraser River in Canada, which does not have dams but has cited studies that compare to the Columbia River, which flows out of Canada down to Washington, where 60% of the power is generated from dozens of river dams in the state. They found that the salmon returns were better on dams or on rivers with dams. Big surprise. God gave us beavers to show us the value of dams. Sometimes beavers build dams in less than ideal places, but thanks to good engineering, we always build dams in the best possible locations, and the dams improve the salmon flows.
They did assessment of all of the rivers on the Pacific coast, and they compared the dam rivers and salmon returns compared to the end dam, including the Fraser, their epitome of everything.
Yeah.
In fact, that was the 2012 one. It compared specifically the Fraser and the Columbia. The Columbia had a higher survival rate of salmon up the Columbia than the Fraser did. They've now confirmed that with every single river on the Pacific coast, that the dammed rivers have higher survival rates of salmon than the undammed river. I wanted to talk about the politics, how it got there, and I think that's critical, and I'll go through that.
Okay, we're going to dive into the process here. This is really what I came for. Rex and others are a wealth of knowledge on this, and I can't thank all of them enough for sharing this with us. Rex takes us back decades to explain how they did it.
Rex also likes to tell stories, and they're amazing, but again, the audio makes a lot of this interview with him impossible to understand. So I'm going to unpack it as we go along in a bit of a timeline fashion. We jump right in here with Theo Johnson, who was previously mentioned as she articulates the problem with the way these weirdos think. They refuse to consider that maybe the dams are helpful, so they will not even consider that the source of the problem is anything other than the dams or the people stealing water from the river for non-essential things like, farming, ranching, and the like. Let me give you yet another example of something that has happened in my state of Washington. This is actually in Okanogan County. The do-gooders have populated a stream with fish that were never originally there organically. That sounds all well and good. Nearly everyone cheers this sort of thing initially. It feels like replanting a tree in an area of the forest that has been cleared, but it's not quite like that. It could not be more insidious or terrible for the property owners, farmers, and ranchers who, by the way, have been pretty much driven out of Okanogan County. How many of the 400 ranchers remain in the county? You're right, it's down to a handful. So what happens with the stream and the newly populated fish? Well, the fish do great until a year when we have less water flow, which is natural than normal. They are saying that this winter is going to be a mild winter, and so we can all see with our own eyes that the tributaries are low, as low as they've ever been, so we can count on next year being a low water year. When that happens, they don't just let the fish run up this stream and die. They restrict the farmers and ranchers and property owners from using that same water in the name of protecting the fish that were never there before. Now let's listen to Theo explain it in her own words. Her family has been in ranching for generations, and this is the direct type of threat that they now face. Her and her family, and all in similar situations, are not wrong to be paranoid about what could be next.
They're using the emergency to take the authority to take our groundwater, and they're also cutting off our surface, our ditch water irrigation whenever our Scott River drops below certain levels. So they're taking these drastic measures in the name of helping these salmon for the last 4 years. Mm-hmm. And then they do this with the dams, which does more damage than we ever could dream of doing. Right. And the narrative is that this has been such a great thing for salmon, what they just did, setting the Klamath River free. It was such a great thing for salmon. But now, going forward, if they see any problems with salmon populations, they're going to be looking at us and saying, well, you guys are obviously, the dams are out, so it's not the dam's fault, it's your fault. It's agriculture. Yeah. You guys need to stop using so much water.
Never mind the repercussions that'll probably last for decades of removing the dam.
Here, Rex is leaning into a piece of the process that is very important to understand. The people made sure that these dams were removed were relentless. They would form a corporation, run down a pathway to see if it would work, and when it failed, they would create another entity or organization, and those same people would shift over to that and run with it and see how far they could get. The concept of doing all we can in hopes that another pathway opens up before we hit a dead end is something that the good guys can use as well, but we've got to get past our ignorance and apathy. We need to start to see threats to our lifestyle and our livelihood as real. The boot is on our neck, and it is time to engage. With this dam removal project, these folks went to painstaking efforts to ensure they were personally protected from the devastation that they were enacting. They created layers of entities, bought insurance for each person, and even got the state legislature to pass laws to prevent them from being held personally liable. And the entity that actually ended up being responsible for removing the dam will be abandoned and abolished in, I think it's 2028. So there is literally nothing and no recourse pathway for those that are impacted by the negative effects of removing the dams.
They talk about the impacts. They'll never have an idea of what it was. They look now with all the publicity, the PR, the KRRC is promulgated, paid with taxpayer, ratepayer money. Not one of the special interests have put in a single dollar of their own, and not one of them have been held accountable for any of the results. And the way they set the agreement up, no matter the worse the outcome is, the more profit and the more power they get down the road.
Now we're going to start to look at the pathway or the process that they use to remove the dams. I'll track with it as we discuss how they did this, but notice that Rex immediately takes us back to a couple of decades, because remember, these people are relentless if they are anything at all. Their life work is to ruin our way of life.
Jump back to the Agenda 21. And when it was signed, our wonderful vice president was kind of put in charge of that, and he assigned a guy, Reed Noss. Reed Noss was an environmentalist, and he came up with a plan for 10 different areas to rewild in the United States. One of those areas was the Klamath, because they figured it's a massive area, it's biodiverse because of that microclimate deal I was telling you about, because it had very little population and because we had just been economically wiped out in the 80s from the spotted owl shutdown of the forest. We went from being, I think it was the 5th wealthiest rural county in California to the 5th poorest overnight, and we've been there ever since. Because of that, they figured there would be no resistance. They could come in and do this real easy. Secretary of Interior was entrusted or empowered with implementing those federal funds to get that instigated. A guy named Jim Root, he started what was called then, under that instigation, the Klamath Working Group, with bringing the tribes in, the Klamath tribes, to try and bribe them into coming in, getting involved, saying, we're going to give you power, we're going to give you authority. They had to supersede the rights of the people who owned the water rights up there, and the only way they could do that, since the government couldn't, was to use them as a spear point to get rights to time immemorial, and started lawsuits and actions in order to identify that. 2 primary district judges actually enforced every one of those. Wagner, who's the other one? Wagner and starts with an L.
So this was the Oregon side of
California too. It began in Oregon,
right.
yes. They created the Klamath Working Group. Then that transitioned into, funded by the Department of Interior, Secretary of Interior, into the KBRA, the Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement.
So you have Agenda 2021, the Klamath Working Group, and then
they had to create a local agreement. They figured the only way they were going to pull this off is to bring in some local people in order to participate, in order to get backing so they could claim it was a local agreement. Okay. Klamath Working Group came into transition, I think it was after 2000. Okay. They, in order to get compliance, we were under the jurisdiction of the Klamath Basin Compact. The Klamath Basin Compact was congressionally approved essentially with the same power as a treaty. It was immutable. It can only be changed with a 2/3 vote of Congress. It was structured around the 1957 agreement for adding Iron Gate and John Boyle. We were under the Klamath Basin Contract Agreement, which put all the resources on an equal basis. Hydropower, municipal water use, agricultural use, all of that, they were equivalent. In order to sit, they had been, this group, all the special interests, the environmental groups, had been filing lawsuits against the ranchers and farmers up in the upper basin for years. BOR kept cutting off and putting in U.S. Fish and Wildlife, kept putting on restrictions. They decided to create the endangered suckerfish. The funny part, which I mentioned before, the funny part is they refuted the basis of that suckerfish endangerment years later by BOR's own resident scientists, refuted all the information for creating an endangered status for suckerfish. And what was the response for it? This was before Hauser. They fired all 7 of the scientists. They took them to court. That's why I have their studies, because they put them out and released them when they were fired. They went to court, and the court records, they made an agreement and sealed all of the records and sealed the file. You won't find those studies now. but it showed that their endangered status was wrong. Fish and Wildlife came in and said, you aren't doing that, get rid of them. All of these regulatory agencies and the special interests were filing conditions on them to drive out agriculture right there. So they'd been under the gun for some time. FERC approved, as part of this entire agreement, this optimized agreement that took place at the turn of the century, Copco was an integral part. It was requested that
The Copco Dam.
the Copco Dam, it was necessary to optimize the water conditions, improve them from the eutrophic conditions that existed in the marshes up there, from the disease-ridden conditions because of the mosquitoes and all of that, humic acid that kept being contributed downstream, and the lack of water because the evapotranspiration from the marshes and the absorption actually absorb and evaporate more water than it does to irrigate wet crops. So in order to optimize all that, they made that symbiotic relationship of reducing the marshes, getting the wildlife refuge, taking water that was formerly landlocked in Tule Lake, adding it to the Klamath in the late summer, and then raising Upper Klamath Lake by several feet to store 600,000 acre-feet of water. 500,000 in the floodwaters in the winter. 500,000 acre-feet to be used by the farmers who are paying for all of this to continue operation, and 100,000 acre-feet to come down the Klamath in late summer that often didn't come. This would be subsurface. This is
Clip, Rex just mentioned the vast reservoirs created by the dams. They were tremendous. I saw them with my own eyes. There are 4 dams that were removed. The first to be installed was Copco, which created a massive tributary behind it. I got to see the craters left, and it was at least a mile wide, in places maybe wider. They also built Copco 2, which was just a bit downstream from Copco 1 to further increase the size of the water storage and to provide flood controls. It is important to note that the Klamath, when it was undammed, would have massive fluctuations in water flow from one year to the next. It is believed that many of the homes on the river will be destroyed in the coming years because the water flows will once again swing wildly. And without the reservoirs, the people of this Northern California and Southern Oregon region have little to no method of defending themselves from fires. I'm also tracking the process flow here through this, and will explain that in more detail in a bit. Rex's depth of knowledge is fascinating to listen to, so let's continue.
It's important, and the transition of that structure is important, because when they did the KBRA, they sucked in, they had to get, their ultimate goal is to get rid of the vast majority of agriculture in the Upper Basin. This is
what is the KBRA?
Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement. Okay. So in order to, what they did is they approached some of the biggest agricultural groups there.
And that restoration agreement is the agreement that removed the dams.
They had 2 conditions. That was the agreement that they were going to do locally that included 2 provisional conditions. In order to sit at the table, you had to agree to 2 positions. Didn't matter what your belief was. You had to agree that the dams were coming out, and you had to agree to a new hierarchy of water usage, where instead, you had to agree to fish first. So instead of the equal balance under the Klamath Compact, you had to agree that fish would come first for water usage, which meant government acquisition of the use and the appropriation of water for the fish.
This is one of the places that the law was clearly violated because of the Klamath Basin Compact passed by Congress, which protects the rights of the use of the water by all parties as equal partners. The Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement, or the KBRA, and the associated board was formed. And as Rex said, the board members had to agree that the dams were going to be removed and that the fish were the highest priority in the future for the use of water. This subordinated all the other uses, including municipal use for water to use in your homes, and agricultural use, which is the farmers and the ranchers. This violated the Klamath Basin Compact, which requires 2/3 majority of Congress to change. They simply created an entity, and without any reasonable state leadership, they were able to simply bypass Congress without any arguments. If anyone spoke up, then they would be targeted by the powers that be until they were silenced. We've seen examples of this in unending fashion politically in the last couple of decades. I was targeted by the IRS for a business audit during the Obama era that lasted for 3.5 years. They found nothing, essentially, that wasn't just made up. I have a friend who was tagged by a rogue member of the FBI for trumped up accusations about exports because he's a big donor to conservative candidates. Thousands were targeted following the J6 protest in the 2020 election. President Trump was targeted because he would not be silent and for submitting himself and his life to run for president. There are thousands of examples of this happening, and it is only possible when we, the people, remain silent and we let our bold leaders get too far out in front as they tell the truth all alone.
Is there something that legally changed it, or is it legally still in place?
Still in place.
They just violated it.
The person who's in it right now is Kristen Lambert, Jim Root's daughter. She's also the head. She is the government representative, the chairperson for that. She's never been removed. Now they put her in order to keep that squelched when we started raising that as an issue. The Klamath Compact is 3 entities. It's Oregon, California, and the Fed. The Fed is just the chairperson. There's supposed to not be any active participation unless they're breaking the tie. If California and Oregon agree on whatever's required in order to enforce the conditions of the Klamath Basin Compact, then the federal chairperson can break the tie. But that hierarchy, those conditions were equal-based hierarchy use of water within the entire Klamath Basin. In order to subvert that, they had to step away from that and create their own agreement. In order to subrogate it, they had to put their own people in charge of the federal part so they could control it. Both states were participants. The governors appoint the person who goes on the commission. So we were having to sue their breach of the enforcement, which they control. So we got no place, especially after they put Kristen Lambert in, who's also the head of Oregon Trout Unlimited.
So the only people sitting at this table
at that point, it was the special interest, the environmental groups, Jim Root. It was paid for and seated at the table, of course, was the Secretary of Interior and his emissary from U.S.
tribal involvement?
Pardon me?
Was there tribal involvement? Did they land
Yes.
on either side? They wanted the dams removed?
The Shasta Indians were the only one. This was their Aboriginal territory. And I don't want to get too far off the line, but they're the ones who owned every dam that was taken out, right? That was in their Aboriginal territory.
They didn't own the dams, but they owned the ground.
Owned the ground, right?
Yeah, Did they profit from the
They
energy generation?
They were absolutely against it. They have comprised it.
Against
It's a long story. I won't go into all of it. But there were 2 groups of Shasta, very few of whom remained. Part of my relatives are there. My brother-in-law who just sent me a text is actually Shasta Indian. He belongs to both groups, part Shasta Indian, and which all of them are. Betty Hall and Doyle's, it was up in Butte. Actually, the only written agreement they ever had between the two, the only thing they ever agreed on was they were both against the dams coming out. They didn't want them out. But Doyle died. Woman named Sammy Jo Diffentorum, who, she's like a 16th to 32nd from my genealogy figures of Shasta, is now created that was their land for forever and ever. Because Muir, who was with KRRC, approached her and the government and said, we might get you federal recognition. We will give you the lands up there if you sign on to and agree to that. That's a separate.
Okay, this is another avenue that they use to get what they want. They will target people that oppose them, and they will entice others to agree with them. In this case, they are offering A person that has a 16th of her bloodline back to one of the tribes rights to certain land in order to get their support to remove the dams and subjugate water use to prioritize fish. This is not an unusual play of land control used by these type of people because they know that the tribes will have more leverage to protect the future development in the land once they control it. If you watch the TV series Yellowstone to the end, you saw just how this can play out. No one dares speak against the tribes, even if what is happening completely violates the rights of other citizens.
Right?
I'll shortcut it, but we can't pass up on it. The KBRA was formed for the agreement. They brought in less than 10% representation of agriculture, KWA, Klamath Water Users Association, who were the big boy corporate guys. They had the money. Who had agreed to that, to sit at the table in exchange for the promise that if they agreed to dam removal and reallocation of water hierarchy, that they would get preferential treatment of any water that was left available over and above that of all of their neighbors that they were throwing under the dams. It was a survival issue. One group said, we'll fight to the end for the benefit of everybody. The corporate group said, oh yeah, we'll sign on as long as we can survive to have the thing. They created that agreement. Ancillary to that agreement was the Secretary of Interior then pointed his funds at creating the Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement, KHSA. That agreement, the reason they formed it, same entities, same people, same contributors. The only thing is the KBRA didn't have Pacific Power. They weren't seated at the table. They created the KHSA, and the governors and the Secretary of Interior got together and they said, we want you to join in on this meeting. We're going to create the settlement agreement. And Pacific Power said, oh, hell no. We aren't doing that. That doesn't make any sense. We have the studies that show how much better the water is than it was, how much we contribute through the hatchery. That was 20 years after the hatchery was built, with the artificial cold water it produced at Iron Gate, was the reason the populations jumped up so much. And for 20 years after it was put in, the agencies themselves hailed it as the greatest improvement for sustainability for salmon in the entire Pacific West.
Wow.
And it was only all this time later that changed. That amount was going to be taken out. So they said, you're going to go to this table. Pacific Power said no. They said, yeah, you are. Because if you don't, California governor issued one of the fastest change in TMDLs that ever took place. The scoping took them 20 days. We fought against the thing. They changed the TMDLs to make it impossible for the 401 permit that they had to get for Pacific Power to be passed anymore. They passed with flying colors all of the time before that, but they changed during this meetings the TMDLs that made it impossible for them to do it. And they said, if you don't participate, you'll be responsible. You'll have to shut down and you'll have to take the dams out on your own dime.
So Rex, the other way of saying that is that the government made it impossible for Pacific Power to comply with Clean Water Act regulations.
Correct.
While keeping the dams in place. They
Yep.
basically told them, we're never going to give you approval under, Clean Water Act regulations again with these dams here. So you may as well just join us, or else you're on your dime, you're tearing these things out.
During this
So
time,
this-
Pacific Power changed hands twice. It ended up then in the hands, the other two fought it. It ended up in the hands of Buffett. When they went to Buffett and they said, you need to do this, and he said, well, what am I going to get for it? And they said, well, the ratepayers and the taxpayers are going to pay for it all. You don't have to pay anything. And you aren't held liable. You're not responsible. And we're going to give you lots of perks. You can write off the entire cost on taxes within the next 4 years. And we'll give you, and this was kind of off record, that it all magically happened. The other was on record. We may give you green light permission on the coal-fired plants in the gas-fired plant they were going to put in at Malin that had been stopped by the environmental groups up until that point. All of a sudden, they were magically all approved. So Buffett then was all on board for it. He said, oh yeah, we're wholeheartedly behind it, and it's a great deal. At the KHSA meeting then, without any ratepayer representation, they ended up appropriating the money from the ratepayers. The governor, who was seated at the table, ordered the CPUC to pass it and say it's in the interest of the public, even though the CPUC public advocacy group is part of there to ensure the interest of the ratepayers, went against it and said you shouldn't do that. And of course the commissioner said, too bad, so sad, it's all good. They signed it all off. So we ended up paying for it. 200 million here, 250 million from the taxpayers out of Prop 1, where they promised not $1 would go to Klamath Dam removal. So they changed the language to say it will only apply to any agreements that occurred before 2013. So we're getting into illegal stuff in the words, but the weeds there too. So this agreement came about. They all signed on to it. They used their model science I told you about already in order to justify it with the secretaries of appointed expert panels that concluded theoretically it was possible. Enter Paul Hauser. That's what Theo was asking me to bring him into it too. He was appointed by Obama as a new thing. It was the Science Integrity Officer. First one it ever been. He was there to ensure, and the intention was to impose environmental conditions on all of the public. It's to gain control of the assets of America. Is a unique place. It is one of the few places in the world, and the UN stated that in Agenda 21, that we were difficult. It was one of the few places that private citizens can own natural resources. That's antithesis to every environmental protocol that the UN stands for and that the U.S. signed on. So they had to figure out a way to confiscate those resources without paying for them. Because under the Constitution, you have to pay for them, and they could never justify paying for them, so we had to do it through regulatory process. So the Secretary of Interior pulled all of this together and said, okay, we have to do this because the environment, this is agreement, but in order to mitigate all the damages that are going to occur, we need $2 billion. So we're going to put this through Congress. That was their original plan. We have a local agreement that nobody here agreed on. 80% of the population voted against, and they ignored us. We never had a seat at the table. I was disallowed from joining any of the groups. They ended up saying, well, we're going to pass this through Congress easily. Even Murkowski signed on to it, supposedly Republican. Oh, wonderful thing. Except they wouldn't approve the $2 billion. And Malfa did step up enough that at the point that they said, we aren't going to spend that kind of money. So basically, under the terms of the KBRA and the KHSA, both of them were null and void. If they couldn't get the money, the money was all to be administered by the special interest to improve the environment with all of this once it happened. When that was disallowed, the KBRA fell apart. The KHSA fell apart subsequently, except the Department of Interior, Secretary of Interior, said, no, we still haven't got that. That's my order. So he put public funds into secretly organizing, not so secretly, but secretly, supposedly. They weren't doing public releases on it. He approached the governors, brought them together, and the special interests that were there, and said, wait a minute, we need to come up with another approach. And they said, we can't get it through Congress, that's obvious. We aren't going to get the money through that, which you guys need and we want to give to you. I can't give it to you because my budget doesn't allow for it directly. Congress would have to approve any exemplary outside of our budget, and I'm not giving you my budget. So you guys, we need to come together. They met at Sacramento, went down to a couple of the deals, tried to get in, of course couldn't. what they did is they came up with an alternative plan because FERC, the Regulatory Commission, was appointed and under the control of the presidents whose directives was to pull the dams. They decided they would bypass all of the people. We don't need to worry about them. We're going to go to FERC. It's going to be California, Oregon, and a handful of the special interests that are there that we can make look good with the tribes. And we're going to do a separate agreement that will then go to FERC, who then has the authority under the Federal Energy Act to be able to act independently in order to do their own EIS, their own evaluation, and to approve it regardless. So what they did is they effectively, theoretically, even bypassed EPA. Irony with that is, of course, they had to lie through their own teeth because FERC had just put through a policy action, their own policy, that said somebody tried to put a dam in back east, and all the groups went against it. So in order to send, they said, you have the power and to approve that, do your own EIS. And FERC said, oh, hell no. We made a new policy that said for any significant construction project that takes place from now on, we will not do the EIS. The EPA will do the EIS. They have to do it. They're the entity with the money, the knowledge, all of that to do it. And of course, that meant that project was immediately killed, right? That's their written policy at the time. They came in and said, we want you to do the EIS and sign off. And they said, okay, that's fine. Wrote their own policy in doing that. EPA signed off on it. They said, we don't have enough money. We don't have enough staff because of COVID that we are going to let California, SEPA, do their own EIS on our behalf because we don't have enough knowledge or information. Of course, California doesn't have to include the ocean. So EPA backed out of it and said they're all good to go because they're under the direction of the California governor. And FERC said, we'll do the EIS. We'll do our EIS based on California's EIS. All of it, by that time, those 10 years had passed of empirical data I told you about. They went to them and said, the special interest, this new agreement, which is the KRRC, it's a derivative of the KHSA. The KHSA, which they stole that agreement, even though it was legally defunct, they changed the name of it to the amended KHSA in order for the completely different signatories under completely different contractual terms, under any contract I've ever seen, that novates the contract. And they said, this is an amended one. Why? Because they carried through the money impounded from the ratepayers and the taxpayers under the KHSA in order to keep that stockpile to take the dams out, to give to the special interest that KHSA, this amended group, now has. But they still, theoretically, FERC was worried about them. FERC's premise was the primary thing, we have two conditions. You have to have enough money to take the dams out, and you have to have, we have to be assured that the special interest doing this, KHSA, cannot be held liable for the damages they create.
So it wasn't the name of the outfit that actually was taking the dams out was KRRC, Klamath River Renewal.
That came after, because the KHSA, what they did to get away from being held accountable personally, is they decided that they needed to create a third-party entity made up of the same people, same governors, part of the same interests, some of the same tribal ones, that they created a non-profit limited liability corporation called the KRRC. Klamath River Renewal Corporation. All these acronyms are so wonderful. And that's intentional. It's to totally confuse people and make it unintelligible. Yeah. So they were created, funded entirely with the ratepayer taxpayer money, at $450 million, $25 million initially out of Prop 1, that theoretically, legally, was never supposed, they actually breached Prop 1 in order to get them that money. they took that money and started working then to indemnify themselves. Part of that money they put to buy insurance on each of the board members so that they were protected. So we have the only money at risk was the public taxpayer and ratepayer money, not $1 of theirs. They had personal liability insurance covered by those dollars to protect them from the unlikelihood that if the corporation went bankrupt, they aren't obligated for anything anyway, just the corpus of the corporation, which is the taxpayer, ratepayer money. FERC said, well, that's all well and good, but that's not quite enough. You guys could still theoretically be held liable if the damages are so great, which FERC knew they would be, because the empirical stuff was there, even though they weren't including it in any of their EIS. They said, if the damages are too great, you could still personally be held liable over the money you're profiting from and controlling of the ratepayers and taxpayers without a vote of the public. That if that money runs out in defending yourselves as board members and the insurance money runs out, you could still be liable. They said, yeah, that isn't too good. So hence, California and Oregon governors got together and said, oh, wait a minute, we're going to make this work. We'll put money in, additional money. We'll get $15 million from California because their original projection was that $450 million was what would have been required. That was the reason for that magic number. That's what they overestimated by far would be required to put in a fish ladder around Iron Gate in Copco. Absolutely ludicrous. In the years since then, we had the sploosh technology, all kinds of different alternatives that have been proven. They could have done it for less than 100 of the cost. Absolutely, totally. We had our own engineered plan that could have done it for $50 million, going around through a natural tributary going up around both lakes, right? Wouldn't look at it, acknowledged it was engineering viable, but because it didn't accommodate the special interests of volitional salmon travel, that it was not viable according to FERC. So they ended up setting up this thing that we're going to contribute, it's going to cost $450 million. That's our limit. The taxpayer, that's the reason it's such a good thing for the public. Can't exceed $450 million. First estimates are coming out, they're up to $600 million. They ended up, after going back to the table 3 different times and screwing it over as much as they could, getting out from obligations that they had originally promised, they were still $60 million on a high-end estimate over what their budget was. So the governors came in and said, okay, we're going to contribute 15, Oregon will contribute 15, and Pacific Power will contribute 15, and the California governor comes in and says, and by the way, in addition to that, if there is any lawsuit that comes into place, California will dedicate all of its legal resources and taxpayer dollars, hence, to protect every one of the signatories of the special interest on the KRRC board, hence the KHSA. That's how they bypass
and is there
everything
documents to support all of those
all the way through it.
Absolutely incredible.
That's
And
amazing.
so what happened to the entity, this final entity that ended up being responsible for hiring the contractors and actually removing the dam? Where are they at today?
KRRC was approved by FERC. What they did is they went under the EIS. They said, here's our plan. We're going to do this great plan. We are going to do such a phenomenal job. We've got so much money. We're going to improve the environment dramatically. And we're going to use all of our expertise and all of our knowledge and all of our background in order to bring this off, representing the wildlife and the public. And you, FERC, need to trust us that we are going to do that. We're going to be, I love the word, transparent. We're going to be transparent about everything. We're going to be full disclosure. Yeah, that's the analogy for obfuscation. So what they did is they said, we're going to take care of it all, just trust me. And FERC, of course, wanted that. They actually, at one point, they suggested to KRRC what they needed to do in order to allow FERC to be able to exonerate themselves in order to be able to bring this off, because they were under the full support and directive to do it. And KRRC did it. They said that was fine. They rearranged things. And FERC basically ended up issuing the orders that gave KRRC carte blanche. They basically said, because the two words that really hit it, that was their public release to everybody for press, was, we're good neighbors. Good neighbors. We're going to be good neighbors. Not one of them lived in the region. Not one. In fact, their office is in San Francisco. And their legal firm is the one that Trump just went after for one of them. That was Perkins and Coie. But FERC said, okay, you can do that. Well, they issued, we'll let you oversee yourself, regulate yourself, you'll report to us. When they did that, as soon as they issued that order, just by happenstance, I think it was like a 3-page deal of any notes that FERC put in rubber stamping what KRRC had requested. They had to make it look like they did something. Oh, and guess what? Guess who the commissioner was at FERC? Robert Glick. Guess what Glick's prior employment was? Legal representative between Pacific Power and the federal government, and FERC, was appointed to be the commissioner for FERC. He voted on it, didn't even abstain. No prejudice there, no positioning. So they ended up approving it. They happened to note one thing, because all of the EISs they did were pretty much uniform throughout. They said, we recognize there's going to be massive damages. We recognize they may destroy all of the fisheries. We recognize that it may harm all of these wildlife. We recognize that the damages to the public may be profound, but because we have no statistics, no data, no real knowledge of how many green sturgeon and whales and how many coho are going to be affected, because we don't know any of that, we have no way of monitoring. We aren't going to we feel because of that all of those impacts are going to be less than significant and therefore acceptable. And we leave it to KRRC to monitor it, to notify us if they think that something happened that makes it detrimental. As soon as they issued that, one of the orders that applied to us, that was the only thing that did, FERC decided they needed to look like they were officious and really looking out for the people, because nobody had addressed the irrigators on the river, and they figured there were so few of them, they only acknowledged like 26, we're one of them, from John Boyle clear to the ocean. Really? But because they weren't addressed, FERC said, oh, and by the way, you're responsible for replacing the irrigation with the same quantity, quality, and timing that the irrigators would normally use. That was just like a two-word sentence, two-sentence provision. All of the other impacts for the flood damages that are now going to occur, the flood levels are rising, people lost the value of their land, they can no longer build. People like the leeches who you're going to see will now be under the flood deal provision. All of those people, they had effectively delegated all of that to the good neighbor attitude of KRRC to rectify all of their issues that they assured they would take care of them all.
We need to talk about the Klamath mitigation.
Right.
Well,
So
what-
that created
yeah.
the Klamath
Yeah.
Mitigation Fund.
But what happened to the KRRC?
It's still there.
What was the entity that was responsible for removing the dams?
KRRC.
I thought that entity was abolished.
KBRA.
Okay.
The first group, the agreement group up there, was abolished. The KHSA, the original one, that was by the Secretary of Interior's own words, intrinsically tied with the KBRA, also fell apart. But they resurrected it after it was dead to the amended KHSA with the same group, and then created the KRRC to act as the entity to protect themselves from liability.
But our understanding throughout all this, and I think it's been stated, was that KRRC, the Klamath River Renewal Corporation, would dissolve.
Oh,
Would dissolve after the project was completed.
it does, yes.
Right. I think that's, I haven't read through all the paperwork, but it's in there, right?
Theoretically,
It's
it dissolves as soon as they're done with their project.
So when is the project completed in their eyes?
2028.
2020. So it's just a date. It's not because,
It's
everything will
already
be fine
changed.
by then, and it's already what?
It's already changed. It's lengthened a little. In fact, as of last week, I understand, Res Corporation, anyway, to finish the other, KRRC hired contractors to carry this out. They also created, to go back to what you'd asked, they created, part of this was a Klamath Mitigation Fund. Klamath Mitigation Fund was what KRRC had said to FERC, we're going to create a fund that's going to indemnify all of the people who are harmed in their residences, who might be affected, which we determined who might be affected. And that was 30-some people, I think, in the entire region, which is also totally ludicrous. That was KRRC's determination. Then they said, we'll take care of them. We're going to create the mitigation fund. It'll be fine. The amount of the mitigation fund was redacted. It was blacked out. On the public records, you can't get a hold of it. FERC has it on the records, and they knew, but it was blacked out to the public. But FERC came back and said, wait a minute, that's not enough. We think there's an issue with that. So what are you going to do about making sure you have enough money for that? KRRC came back and said they filed a report with FERC. Says, oh, by the way, we decided that you're right. It might not be enough. So we contracted with the attorneys and had them assess what our liability might be. And they came back and they said that if we take part of the local impact mitigation fund, the LIMP fund, and we take part of that money and we put it into a facilities defense fund, that if we use that money to litigate anybody who challenges us, all we have to do is financially break 2 to 3 people before nobody else will follow a lawsuit. Yeah. And a guy named Bruce Collins, who was one of the attorney instigators of all of this, has made millions off of this, just like his compatriot Bonham for U.S., who was appointed. As soon as all that was signed and the deal was done, the governor appointed him to be head of Fish and Wildlife in California. Chuck Bonham, who was formerly the attorney for Trout Unlimited. Bruce Collins, the two of them wrote large parts of the agreement. He's made fortune off of all of the suits and that for the environmental premise. He wants to go to court because he wants this as a precedent to carry forward, all of them do, through all of the other dam removal processes in the country, which they've immediately now moved to Cloverdale and the others.
So wouldn't you say that it would be appropriate to say that FERC is actually in violation of the Klamath Compact? Because weren't they really the driving factors behind this, the authorizing party that bypassed Congress?
Yes, absolutely. They bypassed Congress for it, but they're saying that because the compact is never objected and because the compact is formed of the agreement entities, that it's up to them whether or not they consider it compliant with the premise, and that's what they came out with. They said, oh no, we think it's okay, even though it's if you read it, you would take it as a direct violation of the terms of the Klamath Compact that Collier put in place, Senator Collier, that took, years for them to develop and reach this agreement. Siskiyou County was to get 60,000 acre feet of water rights out of it that they could use, which we have had a plan that would have utilized the naturally untreatable water up above coming down for irrigation for tens of thousands of acres in Shasta Valley, would have taken the Shasta River and allowed it to go down, which is slightly better quality for salmon conducive, interbreeding, allowed that full amount to go down, would have added water to the Shasta River, would have removed nutrients from the upper basin, and it would have reduced the water on our place from coming from the diversion down to the Shasta. But I've seen water down to 450 CFS in this. And 3 years later, the salmon returns were above average. So what they're ascribing, a guy named Hardy that they hired to do that, made over $1.5 million to create the Hardy reports that said, we need this much water. When that didn't work, Coho didn't benefit. They paid him again and said, well, I was wrong. It needs that much more water. So they're up to 1,100 CFS, and that is their minimum flow. But when FERC put that into place, they decided, KRRC said, okay, we're going to take care of these people. We have, FERC said, that's fine. If you're covered with that, you take that money for the defense fund. And if anybody dares to challenge you, you can use it. California stepped in and said, if that's not enough, we'll pay for the legal beyond that. So now we have a reduced redacted amount for the mitigation. They were to go in and do all of the work. That was their promise. Wherever places were susceptible, our old upper field up here is one of them. Once FERC signed off on it, KRRC went into total secret shutdown. Disclosed nothing. The water samples, they assure they're doing water samples, won't release them to the public. The reason for a private entity is because we can now use public monies going through a private entity. They don't have to disclose anything of how they use it, what the results are, what's taken place. And there hasn't been one shred of evidence or of information that has come from KRRC since.
Well, the other issue, I don't think that hardly anybody's received any money through the mitigation fund.
Some
any
have.
affected residents?
A couple
few,
have, yeah.
But KRRC won't disclose to the county how much money has been doled out to people who've been affected. And we also don't know how much of that money in that fund, where it's going to go if it's not spent on the people who it's supposed to be spent on. We don't know how much has been spent, and we don't know where the remaining funds are going to go.
None of the finances are disclosed at all.
Yeah, there's no disclosure at all.
And
Even to the county, which they should be an entity that
and what originally
to get that information.
They promised FERC they were going to come in and take care as a good neighbor, all of these people. As soon as they hired the engineers, they started looking at the things. They said, well, it was up to them to give the options of what they would use. And we'll come in and we'll fix that. What are your options? Well, we'll either build a 10-foot berm around between you and the river.
This is for flood.
For flood protection. Between you, the river, for your campsites and all of that. So they effectively remove all of the value of the property, reduce it incredibly, or remove all use of it in that case. Or if we decide we can raise the foundation of your house, if that'll work, or if you decide we can give you money in compensation, and essentially buy you out. That was the options that they could decide of what to offer. And they would work with you on it. But once they started looking at the cost, then they also looked at the liability, because the options they were presenting had no security at all. Yeah. That still likely wouldn't work, right? So what did KRRC do? They said, oh, wait, we're changing the plan. We aren't doing that now. Now, we will decide if you're impacted. We'll decide what the options are. You will decide which one of those plans you want. You will contract to do it yourself, and we will agree to pay you up to 50% of whatever it is the cost for doing that if we agree.
And didn't you have to sign something then
Yep.
at that point that said you
Non-disclosure.
non-disclosure?
You could, that if you accepted any of it, you were not allowed to speak about it, disclose any amounts to anybody for any purpose. That was
What
the
about
lymph fund.
litigation? Could you sue?
Yes, absolutely could sue. They
Yeah,
want them to
They
sue.
wanted you to because they
They
wanted you
want
to
you to sue. That's why, one of the reasons why they weren't worried about it at all. The reason that
Talk
I
about
kind
that
of
a little
got it,
bit more. Why did they want landowners to sue? Why did they want them to sue?
because it's, Bruce Collins, the ones that, well, all of them do, but he really wanted it because he figured he was going to be the real reaper in that, leading the charge with it. Think of the millions of dollars he'd make taking a precedent-setting case that allows the government with this precedent to supersede the will of the people, getting rid of any vote either by the public that's locally impacted or by the Congress to use regulatory means to confiscate private property rights and water through environmental purposes using the regulatory agencies, using the public's own ratepayer and taxpayer money to do it, who have no say in it. And
not
be
only that, but
held
using
unaccountable.
public paid attorneys from the state of California.
To do it, that's right. And in doing that, not only are they, no, that's why I said earlier, no matter how bad this is, the worse it is, the more profit every signatory sitting on that board is going to make. It's going to increase the regulatory agency authority and power, their funding, the special interest profiteering that gets to go on, the tribal influence of the areas that they get to expand to that were never their Aboriginal territory. All of these wonderful things.
Well, the restoration, the industrial restoration complex. Have you ever heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
It is military, same idea.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And
they have seen that. We've seen that in our little Scott Valley watershed for years.
So
They don't try
effectively,
to solve problems. The bigger the problem, the more time and money they get out of
Exactly.
that problem. But solving it or creating, solutions, that's not.
They love big problems because
Yeah.
it requires big paychecks to fix the problem.
Mhm.
the only one who is exempted from that part was us, the handful of irrigators. But as far as I know, there were like 6 of them. Whoever approached them, because nobody trusts them, neither did I, but I had no choice. And because they didn't fall under the lymph fund non-disclosure,
Say that.
I
what
can
that
talk
is.
about it.
That's what's the lymph fund again? It's
well, they changed it now, of course, when they hired Joan Smith and the PP&L retiree.
Mendenhall?
Yes, thank you, Mendenhall, Monty Mendenhall. When they hired them to administrate this, that put local entities between KRRC and the public. They were going to administer it, but of course their administration, to make sure that the public was taken care of, was only with the approval of the money that they can't disclose, and approval of the options from KRRC directly to them, and non-disclosure between them and any of the entities involved.
so lymph was a mitigation fund
Correct.
for local impact
Mitigation fund, and Joan Smith then changed it to make it sound friendlier, I think, to the Klamath mitigation fund.
Okay.
Yeah.
Either way, it didn't ever operate as planned. And one of the things that I heard about landowners around the former Copco reservoir is a lot of their wells have dried up. And so there was supposed to be money to help them somehow make up for that loss of their water for their homes. And they were offered $5,000, I believe, and then had to sign something that they would never come
back
back for
again.
more, or
And when it came
and
to
you can't
mitigation,
drill a well. I'm pretty sure you can't drill a well deep enough there now to find water for those poor people. And if you could, it's going to be a lot more than $5,000.
It's still, from what I understood, Chrissy is the one that talked about all of that, and she'll fill you in. But some of them have been addressed, many of them haven't. They have subsided. The only thing they agreed supposedly to be responsible for up there was the wells in the areas that KRRC decided they would be responsible for.
Mm-hmm.
And so consequently, they're still shoving that off to the side. Now the major contracting entities are gone. When they did the assessment, they said, we find no evidence that any salmon of any common nature is here. The habitat that they do have is inconsistent, not very productive. So they ended up putting in Copco with the provision that they would put a hatchery at Fall Creek, which was one of the only 3 creeks and the best one that had enough water it could actually spawn some. It was spring water, so it could spawn some of the salmon. Copco paid for that in conjunction with contributing power it cost to the upper project in order to run it, so that Copco could then get water in late summer to run the power generation that historically before that didn't occur.
Right.
The problem is not what we can do now. This damage is done, just like it was done on the Condit Dam, just like it was done on the Elwha. Total, complete disasters. They said the damage is irrefutable and is permanent. So they're trying to figure out a new narrative in order to blame the damage on the dams that existed before, saying, well, the reason it'll never recover is because those dams were there and they did so much work.
This entire project began because I wanted to understand the process of who and how they came to a place where they had the authorization to destroy these 4 power generating river dams. Next, Richard Marshall, the past president of a local water users group, walks us through a summary of what happened and what we are facing.
When I came in and moved into the valley there, I got connected with the water users and eventually became president of the water users. That was 2012. So it was after the initial effort that they made, but right in the sort of the beginning of the process. And we had a number of successful attempts on the legal side to try to stop it. But in the end, when we got to the issues of appeals, we couldn't afford the appeals process. And I think the one thing I most would like to say to you, knowing what you're trying to do and facing the issues you're facing, is to recognize that the very first thing you have to do is you have to have some control or entrance into the government process itself, because both the federal government and the NGOs, and I'm going to mention a name to you you want to remember, it's Richard Bruce Collins. Richard Bruce Collins is an attorney with the Environmental Law Foundation. He's on every single board. If you look at the boards across the country of people that are in the fish, keep the fish, get rid of dams, okay, get rid of dams. He's in that process. He originally was with NHI Foundation, which was partly funded by Soros and by Bill Gates and that group out of San Francisco. And the KRRC group that was formed to attack our area came out of actually New York City, and a law office in New York City was formed as a part of the River Keepers, which were already in our area, Klamath River Keepers. And they were then transferred, the corporation which was formed back there was transferred to California and was put into practice in California specifically for the purpose of removing the dams. The state of California gave a check, I have a copy of that check, of $25 million to fund KRRC in the initial part of the process because they didn't have any money, right? They had no experience, nothing. The people who formed the board for that group were basically out of the state of Oregon and state of California, and a few of the Indian tribes were brought together, and some NGOs from the environmental world to get rid of the dams. It had nothing to do with fish. We had a conversation one time with the attorney for the Klamath, no, what do they call them? Yeah, Klamath River Fisheries Group, that stated in a conversation was an email conversation with about 100 people, that it wasn't about the fish. It never was about the fish. It was about the money. What he was referring to is a Pacific court caved this issue because they didn't want to have to fight to keep the dams in place. So they gave in, but they didn't give in easily. Warren Buffett stood full, and he negotiated a deal with the state of California through the Pacific, the CPUC, the Public Utilities Group, to pay him a $450 million accelerated depreciation. In addition to that, he got a blank check for any environmental damage that take place. So that's how that process got started. Include all the dams, including the ones I think up at your place was the original idea behind Warren Buffett entering into this process along the western coast to remove his dams and instead rely on power coming out of the center part of the country where he is building these environmental power production units, the solar and the wind. And that's how Obama got involved in the process, because he was pushing that at the time.
Because hydropower isn't clean?
It's not, no, it's not that. There is in our country and throughout the world, there are people who believe dams shouldn't be built because it stops fish access, right? It's like a religion. And we're facing the same thing in our Scott Valley. These people don't care what you do. They just want to have their way. So if you look at some of those old pictures, you'll see that where these dams, there were 7 of them, 7 dikes we call them, they were there, but in order to log the area up here, which they logged heavily up in this area, they had to cut through those lava dikes to move the logs down, and then fish could go up after that point, but not before that point. So that was one of the issues that never got really explored very much.
The other thing that's just quite an atrocity to me is not only is this offensive to the region, to the people, especially here in Copco, have lost an absolutely beautiful lake reservoir, and all the benefits and wildlife that come with that, but the power company, Pacific Power, right, had the audacity to actually charge the customers to pay for all of this. Right.
That was one of the suits that we filed with CPUC. That's how I got involved with CPUC originally, in trying to fight the surcharge that was attached to the dam removal process. And that was how I came across the information about what Warren Buffett received to sign off on removing the dams, so he wouldn't fight it. It's about control.
That. Earlier you said, people are important to not just salmon, but it's very clear that this isn't about salmon either.
Right.
Otherwise, they wouldn't have done
It's
done
control.
to the river what they just did to the river.
Right.
They may have very carefully excavated the footprints of the dams, or come up with an actual fish passage solution that didn't just obliterate the salmon like they just did.
Right.
So, and also, they wouldn't have taken away the clean, cold water source that was allowing those salmon to thrive in the Klamath watershed.
Right.
Now that's gone. We have a hot river. I refuse to accept that Agenda 2021 or 2030, isn't it?
Yeah,
now?
2030.
That
now,
it's really about putting animals over people. I think it's just people trying to get control over other people.
Yeah, we're part of the test case. Our area here in particular, where we're at today, is a test case for them to pull off these dams elsewhere. In your area in particular, which is probably next on the hit list.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate your
Yeah.
expertise.
Good luck in your
thank
efforts.
you.
I created another video with more detail and specific timeline for the steps that they took to authorize the dam removals. See the links in the description below. There's a total of 4 videos. But to summarize it now, this is what happened. The Klamath River dams, Iron Gate, JC Boyle, Copco 1 and 2, built between 1918 and 1964, generated about 163 megawatts of hydropower and irrigated about 16,000 square miles in the Klamath Basin, spanning Oregon and California. They stabilized water flows, cooled hot upper river water for salmon with the use of reservoirs and fish ladders. The dams and the resulting reservoirs enabled recreation, fixed natural barriers without blocking fish passage, The 1957 Klamath Basin Compact allowed water equality for power, agriculture, and fish. FERC licensed operations ran decades despite false 1988 endangered listings of suckerfish. Post-2001 water crisis reclamation halted farm deliveries for fabricated salmon protection. In the 1990s, Agenda 21 and the Wildlands Project targeted dams for rewilding salmon habitat. Bush's 2002 working group, including tribes the Yurok, Karuk, and the Klamath, Pacific Corp, the operating company of the dams, was forced to sell the dams because they couldn't get relicensing because the state wouldn't allow them. So a public company bought the rights only to use the benefits of the tax incentives and other benefits to their advantage. Berkshire Hathaway bought Pacific Corp for about $5 billion. They likely knew that the dams were a liability, but they were also likely told that there would be a pathway to ensure the dams were not a liability for Berkshire. Pacific Corp, which included other power generating assets, only about 1% of that energy was generated by the dams. It is reported that Berkshire took a tax credit for around $1 billion, so they bought Pacific Corp for $5 billion, lost only 1% of the revenue, but were able to take a tax credit for $1 billion or 20% of the purchase price. What a great deal for a company. In 2015, Congress rejected ratification of the KBRA and the KHSA plans, another setback, but never fear, Obama to the rescue. The Department of Interior Secretary Sally Jewell of the Obama administration amended the KHSA, providing $20 million to reconvene stakeholders and form the KRRC. An environmental impact statement was prepared by KRRC and accepted by the EPA, who would normally perform such a review on their own. Nothing crooked to see here at all. FERC happily approved the license transfer based on this environmental impact statement in November of 2022, with the requirement that the liability coverage be increased. California, Oregon, and Pacific Corp each pitched in $15 million, and California's governor agreed to cover complete legal defense costs through the state budget. In other words, they were able to make the liability go away because they had enough legal firepower that no one would be able to afford to challenge them. Trump was headed for re-election, and the weirdos knew that the window was closing. Reservoir drawdowns started in January of 2023, with removals completed starting with Copco number 2 in October of 2023. Copco 1, John C. Boyle, and Iron Gate, all by October of 2024. Drawdowns began in January of 2023. Dams were removed in October 2023 and 2024. Meanwhile, KRRC is set to dissolve in 2028, which will wash away all future liability and recourse or accountability. This regulatory economic scheme destroyed vital infrastructure while fleecing ratepayers to pay for a radical political agenda. The damage on the rivers will last for decades. Even when it is restored, it will only be untamed in a dangerous river it was prior to the dam installations. The impact to our fellow citizens will last throughout time, and generations are impacted by the demolition of the dams by evil intending, selfish, manipulative people. Watch the other videos in this series where we unpack the stories of people and we take a drift ride down the now dead river. And I also have one other video that goes into a lot more detail on the timeline that I just summarized very quickly. And think about the real cost of rebuilding the dams. It will take billions of taxpayer and ratepayer dollars to rebuild these dams once again and to tame this radical and out of control river. What can we learn from this? First, it's evident that evil people can and will relentlessly work regardless of the law or natural rights to get what they want. We can see that this evil will leverage regulations like withholding permits or incentives like tax perks or other financial perks to force private entities to comply. We see that the trust the science only applies to situations where the evil agrees with the science, but when it argues with it, the science is ignored or simply considered illegitimate. We can also see that when people get involved, we can collectively oppose evil, but when we are left astray and when individuals are left alone to fight, they will be crushed. Next, it is clear that some attorneys leveraged their history and skills to establish precedent, not only to force compliance, but to ensure future wins for their team. Next, we can see that an evil faction will leverage the plunder of the people and force us to compete with the government, knowing we will never have a level playing field to fight on. The people will lose, and our adversaries will force us to pay for our opposition's legal defense. There are no positive attributes to the dam removal. Zero, nothing. Everything is on the negative. Sure, some companies benefit and the people that did it get to celebrate, but there is nothing positive for we the people. Folks, I hope this journey through Klamath River's devastation stirred something in you, not just to feel the weight of what's been lost, but to stand up and fight for our nation. And if you're with me in Washington, for our beautiful state. I poured my heart into this, and I'm asking you to join me in rescuing America. I wrote a book called How We Broke America to show you how your voice matters. You don't have to fix everything. Just pick your lane, find others who share your passion, and get to work. Together, honoring God, we can rebuild what's been broken. My promise as your candidate for Congress is to stop the reckless forces tearing down the tools God gave us to thrive. Dams aren't just structures, they're a gift. God even gave us the beaver to show us how to build them and why. They power our homes with clean energy, they provide safe passage for fish, they deliver water for crops and protect our land from floods. They're not just benefits, they're essential for life, from affordable energy to food on our tables. We now know how they destroyed the Klamath River dams. Lawfare, political bribes, taxpayer money, and junk science. They'll try it again, but we're ready. Armed with the truth, we'll protect our dams and the American lives they sustain. I and others, as you can tell from the documentary, won't rest until those Klamath dams are rebuilt stronger than ever, and I'll fight to build more dams. Dams that support our fish, generate cheap power, enable bulk transportation, and secure water for our farmers. This is about human flourishing, and I'm all in. Join me, let's protect our future, honor God, and make America thrive again. Check out the companion videos linked below, and let's get to work.
American values do not align with leftists because they hate America. We must engage by giving our dollars and our talents to defend our great American values. Visit JerrodSessler.com to donate and get involved. Say yes to America.